Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today, joining us is another one of those Pulitzer Prize authors that we have from time to time. His name is Richard Russo. He is here to talk about his new novel, number 6 or 7 on the Times bestseller list. And the name of that novel is Bridge of Sighs, and it's published, as usual, by Alfred A. Knopf. Hi, welcome back.
It's great to be here.
You know, the more I read you, the less I understand your power to capture me and put me under your spell. For example, Bridge of Sighs does not begin grandly at all. There's no, hook in it. And I'm going to prove that. Here is the way Bridge of Sighs starts.
You're gonna make this sound even duller than it is, aren't you?
This is the way it starts. First, the facts. My name is Louis Charles Lynch. I'm 60 years old, and for nearly 40 of those years, I've been a devoted, if not terribly exciting husband to the same lovely woman, as well as a doting father to Owen, our son, who is now himself a grown married man with a wife who has lousy taste in houses. Perhaps what's most remarkable about my life is that I've lived all of it in the same small town in upstate New York, a thing unheard of in this day and age. Some people, upon learning how we've lived our lives, are unable to conceal their chagrin on our behalf that our lives should be so limited, as if experience so geographically circumscribed could be neither rich nor satisfying. When I assure them that it has been both, their smiles suggest we've been blessed with self-deception by way of compensation for all the things we've missed. Now, I love that. I mean, I felt very comfortable with that because, I've read other books of yours. But come on, it is not the way you're supposed to begin writing novels, is it?
Well, certainly not in this century. David Copperfield begins kind of in that way. There was a 19th century, but in the 19th century, you got to start off in a leisurely fashion. You don't usually have that leisure anymore. But I think in this case with this guy, I think we've become so cynical in some ways that when someone starts off and says to you or implies that this is going to be the dullest story ever told, you kind of think, oh no, it must not be. Kind of the way when somebody tells you very stridently that a story is true, every word of this is true, you kind of think, well, I don't believe that right away.
That can't possibly be the truth.
Just as somebody says, I'm going to lie to you now, you think, oh, but it must be for some other purpose.
Well, I have to confess now, after beginning with that tough criticism, that shortly I've been captured again, and I find myself agreeing with Booklist, which Alfred quotes here at length in the cover letter. Here is the novel Russo was born to write. That's what they start with. Coursing with humor and humanity, the sixth novel. Yeah. Wow. By the Bard of Main Street, US of A, gives full expression to the themes that have always been at the heart of his work. The all-important bond between fathers and sons, the economic desperation of small-town businesses, and the lifelong feuds and friendships that are a hallmark of small-town life. That whole notion of carrying forward those relationships, that's terribly important in this book. Mm-hmm. It's a seamless interweaving of childhood memories, sometimes told from 3 points of view, which I must say, to me, never got confusing. I just found it refreshing that, let's look at this another way. I really like that. Tragic incidents, the town river, once the lifeblood of local industry, has become a toxic stew that is poisoning the residents. Oh, this is upstate New York, isn't it? And the unforgettable dialogue that is so natural, funny, and touching that it may perhaps be the best of Russo's many gifts. And that's an interesting thing, the dialogue. You do it so naturally. It's wonderful stuff.
Oh, thank you. Thank
So
you.
I think Booklist is right. I'm not going to apologize for my opening attack. You know, it makes supposedly for good radio or something like that. The unforgettable dialogue part of that of those remarks, it's so natural and funny and touching that it may be perhaps the best of your gifts. Perhaps the naturalness of dialogue, is that what captures me?
Well, you know, it's funny. People always talk about dialogue being natural, and it's the most unnatural aspect of almost anything a fiction writer does.
That's right. To try and write dialogue, yeah.
Because
absolutely.
the more realistic it is, the worse it is, in a way, because in real life, dialogue comes to us through the ear. And the ear elides all. It just forgives. The ear forgives everything.
Right.
But
Right.
in on the page, dialogue comes to you through the eye, which makes it very different. So whenever
Very
anybody says that your dialogue is natural, that's not quite the case.
Bridge of Sighs is a very rich book, rich in character and story. We're going to prove that when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Bridge of Sighs is the book. The wonderful Richard Russo is the author. The publisher is Alfred A. Knopf. And Mamev Medved?
That's pretty close. Mamev, I believe.
If there was Mamev, they should have an accent over that E. Mamev Medved in the Boston Globe has some wonderful things to say. An astounding achievement from its lovely beginning, excuse me, to its exquisite perfect end. Russo has written a masterpiece. He sets his magnificent big-hearted novel in Thomaston, the dying industrial town in upstate New York, where the tannery is turning the Cuyahoga Stream red. Working on a broad, thickly populated canvas, Russo chronicles decades of intertwining lives, limiting the ties that bind and break amid a community's divisions of geography, class, and race. Love in all its varieties, passionate, misguided, brutal, redeeming, lies at the center of Bridge of Sighs. Its pulse is a love triangle. And it is. That is one heck of a story. It really, really. Now, it wasn't easy getting to this story. In a PW interview, your experience parallels something that the artist character, Bobby, mentions. Right. He says somewhere that, he complains somewhere that one thing wrong with agents is that they want to be near the painter, influencing the painting. In the case of Bridge of Sighs, it seems you actually sought out the advice of your agent, Mr. Nat Sobel.
I did indeed, and for the first time, this is my sixth novel. I've, as a matter of fact, it drives my agent absolutely crazy that I don't do that as a rule. He works with a lot of thriller writers. He works with James Ellroy and several others, and James, I gather, outlines his novels. Of course, if you're a thriller writer, you kind of want to know who did it, and it's good to know things from start to finish.
James has been known to say that it takes him longer to do the outline because it's so comprehensive than it does to do the writing.
I had actually had a conversation with him just a couple of nights ago when I was in Los Angeles, and he was saying he had just turned in like a 70-page interview or a 70-page outline for his new book. Mm-hmm. And my agent would love for me to do something like that, but I hate to show him anything until I've worked it all the way through. But with this book, I gave him 650 pages of this novel and said, "Can you make any sense of this at all? Am I writing 3 novels? Am I writing 1 novel?" And
I was thinking he'll never ask to do that again.
You may not. I may have solved that one. The only problem I've ever had with that, I may have just solved.
Oh, good Lord. The fact that you had to do that, though, I think is because of the broadening canvas.
Yeah.
And a large increase in the number of important characters. So
Yeah, this was a real Rubik's Cube, really, and it was far more complex than anything I had done before, and more ambitious, and I got lost in it. I just got lost in the enormity of it and the complexity of it.
the thing is that when you're doing the Rubik's Cube thing,
Right.
Sometimes people get lost, but I dug one up.
Yeah.
Tessa.
Yeah.
I love Tessa.
Oh, thank you. I do too.
And tell us about. I mean, Tessa is in this marriage, and she's the practical one, right?
She's the realist.
She's the bookkeeper, and she is the realist. And tell us about Tessa. There's one incident that I want to talk about as soon as I can find it here.
Well, Tessa is kind of the antidote to Big Lou. I mean, Lucy has grown up in this marriage where he's always had to choose between his mother and his father because they're telling him very different things. Big Lou is a creature of post-war optimism. He believes that in America, the only ending you can have to the family story, the town story, is a happy one.
Right.
And Tessa, is a realist, and she's fairly optimistic, but she's also trying to tell her son that, no, there are two directions you can go in this life.
Right. And the boy, of course, I think it's natural enough, always, kind of sides with his father in that sense because it's so much more comforting.
Absolutely.
And it's so much more positive.
And Lucy is a creature of that comfort, and he's very conservative by nature, and he wants to be reassured at pretty much every turn. When they're surfing in the truck, he's the one who always wants to
Hold on.
he always wants to be in a position to grab on.
That's why he doesn't fall and break his wrist.
That's right.
As his friend Bobby does. Oh, Bridge of Sighs is strong in so many ways, like in its portrayal of relationships. We'll look at some of those when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast, Bridge of Sighs, the new novel by our guest Richard Russo is what we're talking about, making Alfred A. Knopf, the publisher, very happy, I think, as did the folks at Kirkus Reviews when they said,
indeed.
in part, about the novel from the beloved and Pulitzer Prize-winning author Richard Russo. Beloved.
Yeah, my wife may have suggested that to them.
A wise, uplifting book, big-hearted, rich, confounding, absorbing, utterly irresistible from the first page when narrator Lucy Lynch begins to speak. Readers will be drawn so completely into Russo's world that putting the book down each time feels like a shock. That's
From the first page, Jim. Imagine that. The first page.
Well,
that section you read even.
obviously, my position is controversial or stupid. I want to go back to Tessa. One of the things that the parents argue about with Lucy is education, and he wants to keep the kid in the Catholic school, and Tessa, being the practical one, in essence, is too much money. Tessa, Father Gluck replied, reluctantly getting to his feet, "I'm disappointed. Join the club," my mother told him. "We're disappointed, too. My husband was disappointed to lose his job. When we were living in Berman Court and Lou wanted to be an altar boy and you didn't select a single one from the West End, he was disappointed. As for my own disappointments, don't even get me started." And then he leaves, and she's so full of anger. She's pacing
That's
up
right.
and
She's
down in
still
the
worked
house.
up. Yeah.
And the father and son remain seated. And she says, "Don't look at me like that," my mother finally said. And then she shot a look at me. "You neither." "I ain't saying you were wrong," my father conceded. "It ain't that. It's just he was offering a loan. It was a loan he was offering, Lou. We've had to pay it back with interest. I know him. I ain't saying he's lucky I didn't go get that gun." Now, Tessa knows how to take care of them overreaching priests, let me tell you. Now, one of the things we better clear up, because this is a guy who's a main character, the male lead, and his name is Lucy.
Yeah.
How did we do that?
Well, this is a book about destiny, and I'm convinced that an awful lot of what happens to us is determined very early before we've even started making choices. And Lou goes to kindergarten. The first day of kindergarten, his teacher reads off his name, Lou C. Lynch, and everybody in the class turns around and says his name is Lucy. And, of course, poor Lucy is stuck with that for the rest of his life.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
Now, one of the major relationships, obviously, in here is between Lucy, if you will, and his dad, and how, through thick and thin, so to speak, they cling together, if that's the way to put it. Is that a common thing, do you think, between sons and fathers?
It can be. It's the first time that I've written about a father and a son who have had that relationship. In my other novels, it's always been a rogue dad who kind of skips out on his son. Yeah. And here we have the exact opposite of that. So this is I've always written about fathers and sons, but this is the first time I've written about a relationship like this that is so devoted and so based in love that it's almost problematic. These two men adore each other to the point that they sometimes can't look at the truth all that clearly.
True.
Yeah.
The other relationship is interesting from the standpoint of what you were just talking about. How things that happen early in life are so shaping for the rest of one's life, and that's certainly true in terms of the relationship between Lucy and Noonan.
Exactly.
Between Luke and Bobby.
Yeah.
That Bobby was the first friend, and on a limited basis because of school schedules. But Lou couldn't, leave that relationship. And now years and years and years and years later, they're preparing for a trip to Italy, and he's trying to find them.
Yeah. And Bobby is in every way Lucy's diametric opposite, where Lucy is conservative and cautious by nature. Noonan has been something of a wild man in Europe.
Well, and there's a very different philosophy of life here. In youth, you write, we believe what the young believe, that life is all choice. We stand before 100 doors, choose to enter one. And then when we get older, all of that's narrowed down. And the exception to that is Bobby. Bobby is capable to invent both a life and a self to live it.
Yes, that's the American
powerful person.
That's the American dream, isn't it? The ability to reinvent ourselves and from our own imaginations from the ground up,
and have the self to carry it out. Richard Russo has written another great book. It's called Bridge of Sighs. It's published by Alfred A. Knopf. You ought to buy at least 2 copies of it. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.